Welcome to the Lake Chapala Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. My name is Kat Barnett, and I am working with Roy Haynes and Richard Clark and with Michael Reason on the piano and Reverend Matt Alspaugh, who will offer a homily. We have some announcements, which will also be posted on Matt's daily emails. We are developing an emergency contact list for the fellowship in case we need to us, restricts us, holds us back. We are freer than we know when we release ourselves and each other from expectations of what is needed for true community. We are here together in space. I see you, I hear you, I love you. And Matt lights this chalice, a beacon of this community, holding us all together here now. Please light your chalice.
Our chalices are now lit. Our opening words today are by Reverend David Miller. Excuse me for stating the obvious. This pandemic has no false borders between countries. It sees no imaginary constructs of race. It does not discriminate between the powerful, those who have made fortunes, or those who struggle to put food on their table. It will not cede to our illusion of control. It treats us all as if we were one human entity, one fallible, fragile, and irrepressible family, which, if we could ever recognize, like this virus does, maybe someday we would become.
Each week, we take time to remind ourselves that we belong to a community which cares for each other. We do this by sharing significant joys or sorrows in our lives. Joys that are too great for one heart to hold, sorrows that are too much for one heart to endure. Local and world events which call upon us to bear witness. In our daily sharing, Matt has invited people to email joys and sorrows to be read at our service. Several people have sent them. Let us begin by recalling the joys. Whatever you may be celebrating, whether it evokes a feeling of joy or peace for yourself or others. Kathy Coaches says, I have a joy. Bob is being released from rehab facility on Thursday to be with me at our daughter's home. He is making great progress in his recovery. Jim and Joan Bellamy are finding joy in paying their cleaning lady her full salary and asking her not to come clean. They are trying to spread the word in our community and hope some UUs will think about this too. From Linda Jessen, who wanted to report that Peter and I are safely home in Canada and on a 14-day quarantine. And I have a joy from this morning. Amidst all the worrisome news, the mountains are still beautiful and still make me smile when I look at them. And now, let us recall our concerns and sorrows. Whatever you or the world may be holding that is in need of our healing and caring thoughts. Matt talked with Walter Conklin yesterday. He said that he has bladder cancer and is on chemo, hoping for a good outcome. He and Linda are planning to return to Lakeside whenever that is possible. Marlene and Fred have decided to listen to the Canadian government's calls to return while they can. So they will be flying to Ottawa, returning in the fall. They said, we have a concern and a joy to share with our UU friends, a candle of concern for the continuing spread of COVID-19 and all the distress and difficulties it is causing people, including us having to return to Canada a month before we planned, and a candle of joy that our friends Helmut and Marilyn are welcoming us back to their home in Ottawa next week even though they will have to care for us and feed us for 14 days as we abide by the quarantine rules. And also a candle of deep gratitude to Richard and Carol, who share our dog Rudy with us and care for him so well when we are up north. Jan Manning says her wrist is fractured and she now has a fingertip to elbow cast for 4 weeks. She is very grateful for Charlie's help. Janice Kimball says, I am self-isolating into the downstairs part of our home after I get a checkup done this week. Not much else for Francisco, and I will change. Our gallery and workrooms are open air, and Francisco will still be open. I can converse from inside the house, which since I can't walk, I usually do anyway. We'll have groceries delivered. And Bobby Dannebrink says, because of the current pandemic, I have been told to return to the States or face the possibility of flight cancellation and or border closure between the U.S. and Mexico. Therefore, I am leaving Ajijic 6 weeks earlier than I had planned. I will miss you all and wish you good health and happiness. In the hearts of love and in the spirit of prayer, we give thanks for this time together, where our joys can be magnified and our sorrows can be lessened. Blessed be. And now our care candle. This candle, provided by our care team, represents those sorrows that are too raw, too difficult for us to share aloud. We will light this candle for those sorrows which remain present but left unspoken.
Today, instead of a meditation, I want to talk of making our coronavirus sanitation practices into spiritual practices. Let me give you an example. We're told not to touch our faces. Sounds simple, but so hard, right? Let's make not touching our faces a mindfulness practice, just like we might use mindfulness in meditating. Here's what I've been doing. Whenever I notice an urge to touch my face, I say to myself, touch. I take a moment to think, why? Is there an itch? Do I really need to touch my face? If I do, I'll get a tissue or a handkerchief and deal with it. Now, if I realize that I have just touched my face, I also say to myself, touch. I try not to beat myself up for failing to be mindful. But just again, I notice and I wonder, why? Why did I get distracted? Now, some of you may realize that this is just how we work with our minds in a mindfulness practice. We notice when our minds wander and we bring them back to mindfulness. We try not to beat ourselves up. We just come back. So minding our touch can be a meditation, just like minding our mind. So important right now. But it doesn't have to be a burden. It can be a practice for better living, for mindful living.
Our reading today is from Ira Byrok, The Best Care Possible, a physician's quest to transform care through the end of life. Anthropologist Margaret Mead was asked by a student what she considered to be the first sign of civilization in a culture. The student expected Mead to talk about fish hooks or clay pots or grinding stones. But Mead said that the first sign of a civilization in an ancient culture was a femur, thigh bone, that had been broken and then healed. Mead explained that in the animal kingdom, if you break your leg, you die. You cannot run from danger, get to the river for a drink, or hunt for food. You are meat for prowling beasts. No animal survives a broken leg long enough for the bone to heal. A broken femur that has healed is evidence that someone has taken time to stay with the one who fell, has bound up the wound, has carried the person to safety, and tended the person through recovery. Helping someone else through difficulty is where civilization starts, Mead said. We are at our best when we serve others. Be civilized.
Hello, everyone. Last week I was on a retreat, last weekend, completely disconnected from the world on this retreat, from all news, even from the time of day. I returned Sunday night to a different world, vastly changed from what I had left. Our Sunday service last week had been canceled. A family reunion that my siblings and I had been planning here at Lakeside for April also canceled. People were beginning to hole up, to self-isolate. We had all begun to be fully aware of the nature of pandemic, of what exponential growth in cases really means, of overwhelmed medical systems, of shortages, of fundamental medical supplies, masks, respirators, and yes, toilet paper. We began, most of us, to share for self-isolation. Some of us returned to our other homes up north. We began to stock up, to have a reasonable reserve of food on hand should supplies become limited. We learned what social distancing means, and so when we're around others, we keep our distance. It feels awkward, not touching, not shaking hands, not hugging, but we do it. We learned that the virus is mostly transmitted through touch, and so we've learned how to wash our hands for 20 seconds. We've learned what songs to sing while we wash our hands. We've learned to disinfect surfaces that might have been contaminated. We've learned to separate clean and contaminated areas in our living space. For me, for example, my car is contaminated, but my porch is sanitary. For me, it's becoming a ritual, entering the house, dropping the keys, removing a light jacket, washing my hands right away. And we're each finding our limits on our tolerance in receiving news and information. I mean, while we want to know what's going on, what can be known, it can be overwhelming. It's frustrating that so little is known about this virus. And it's disappointing that the unknowing is creating a vacuum into which flows all manner of disinformation, wishful thinking, and even outright lies. We're tapping into our sadness as the isolation begins to set in. If you're like me, we need more rest, even though it feels like we're not doing as much as we were doing before. As my friend, the Reverend Kendall Gibbons says, and I quote, "There's no way around it. This is scary and confusing, and we're going to be profoundly more lonely and sad before it's over. We're living through an inflection point of radical change while being deprived of one of our oldest and most basic resources, which is our human connection." She continues, "Here's what I knew before and what I've learned over time and that I have reason to trust. Like many primates and other mammals, human beings have open limbic systems. This means that we physically influence the way the bodies of people around us function. We influence one another's breathing, pulse, hormones, blood pressure, body temperature, to name just a few. When one person is subject to stress, whether from physical injury or emotional crisis, that stress makes it more difficult for them to regulate their own physiological functioning. They feel tired, sick, anxious, or weak. The normal and normally helpful response of others is to touch that person, to hug them and hold them and be physically close, which helps to support their less regulated limbic system through better regulation of those less stressed others. The injured person can rest in the breathing and the heartbeat of community and be allowed to heal. That impulse to take someone who is suffering literally into our arms is deeply instinctual, and deeply right most of the time. But what we're being told right now, and it makes sense, is that this virus is so contagious and our body's so unprepared for it that the most effective response is to practice social distancing, which means to stay away from each other. In a crisis like this, which would normally pull us toward our families and friends and communities of support, we must discipline ourselves to keep an uncomfortable boundary. So what Reverend Kendall is telling us is that we have to find new ways to stay connected with one another, ways that don't involve physical touch and closeness so much, but that still preserve our humanness. As Margaret Mead said, helping someone else through difficulty is where civilization starts. And we have this yearning to help ingrained in us. So when we're asked to isolate, to keep our distance, we feel sad, helpless, even somehow uncivilized. So when I returned from my weekend retreat, I realized that the most important thing we could be doing right now at LCUUF was to stay connected. We couldn't afford to continue to cancel Sunday services, so with the Sunday Services Committee, we quickly pulled together this online service, and we expect to continue this for some time. By the way, your feedback about this service in whatever form is appreciated. And when Trudy suggested a daily sharing of readings and poems, I immediately said yes, and have appreciated her assistance in putting those together. And when Colleen wanted to proceed with the emergency contact info form, we quickly put that together. I'm glad to see how you are helping one another, even while broken bones heal, and helping those around you that are even more vulnerable in this crisis. Going forward, we'll have another Sunday service online next week. We're also organizing a couple of small group meetings online next week as time for connection and sharing. We're still learning how to do all this stuff, how to stay connected as a fellowship. I hope you'll be able to help, to participate as we feel our way through this new reality. I am settling into the reality that this will not be over in weeks. It may go on for months, even seasons. We have to be ready. We have to do what feels unnatural, even paradoxical. Paradoxical? Dr. Emily Landon, an epidemiologist in Illinois, said just yesterday. She said, "It's really hard to feel like you're saving the world when you're watching Netflix from your couch. But if we do this right, nothing happens. A successful shelter in place means you're going to feel like it was all for nothing. And you'd be right, because nothing means that nothing happened to your family." As humans, as civilized people, we are called to do what's right. We feel a higher calling to remain connected, to care for one another, to do what we can to help the vulnerable. And I think also as progressives, we know that the world that will emerge from this crisis will be different from the world that we have known. And so it's not too early for us to begin to work together to organize for a better future. What we face is not easy. We're being compelled to live out a paradox, to do what is not natural for us as humans to do, to isolate from each other. But we are resilient. We are capable. We are able to stay connected, to care, to organize, even in the midst of this crisis. We are called to find a way. We will get through this, that I know. And maybe on the other side, we will realize that what this virus has reminded all of us, that deep down, we are the same. We are one.
Let us extinguish our chalice with these words which we read together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we keep in our hearts and share with all the world.
Richard.
The postlude today is one of my favorite songs, and it is very appropriate for the time that we are facing. And I'd just like to read the lyrics to the second verse. Sail on, silver girl, sail on by. Your time has come to shine. All your dreams are on their way. See how they shine. Oh, if you need a friend, I'm sailing right behind you. Like a bridge over troubled water, I will ease your mind. Like a bridge over troubled water, I will ease your mind. Bridge Over Troubled Water by Paul Simon.
Our closing words are by Annie Forrester. As far as our love flows, as far as our hope grows, as far as our yearning goes, we are no farther one from another. Blessed be. Go in peace.